And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is February the 6th, 37th day of this new year. Just 328 days to the year's over with, and we'll start a new one. Holidays observances. National Bubblegum Day. Pay a Compliment Day. National Woman's Heart Day. National Give Kids a Smile Day. National Frozen Yogurt Day. National Working Naked Day. Now, in this weather, that'd be an interesting sight to see. World Muay Thai Day. Ronald Reagan Day. National Wear Red Day. Number Day. Reclaim Social Day. National Chopsticks Day. Take part in ancient traditions it's been around for thousands of years in the Asian culture. Eat with and enjoy the unique experience of using chopsticks. And after you drop them a half a dozen times, you'll pick up your fork. National Valentine's Shopping Reminder Day. Sammy National Day. National 80s Day. National Lame Duck Day. Waitangi Day. That is an interesting festival. And maybe, there we go. It's celebrated by people throughout the country of New Zealand, particularly in the Bay Islands. Events can last for up to 3 days, including a special opening service that takes place at dawn on Waitangi Day at the Treaty Grounds. Yes, there's all kinds of celebrations around the world. Women's Heart Week, Shape Up with Pickles Time, World Interfaith Harmony Week, Chiang Mai Flower Festival, Publicity for Profit Week, National Green Week, Artes Mundi, Tinnitus Awareness Week, Tapati Festival, the Venice Carnival still going on until the 17th, La Poutine Week, National Storytelling Week, Tapati Rapa Nui Festival, Pay Your Bills Week, International Networking Week, Feeding Tube Awareness Week, and National School Counseling Week. Famous people born on this date. Ronald Reagan, of course, Axl Rose, Babe Ruth, and the one and only Aaron Burr. Well, now let's see what stories we got in the news, because there's always things going on, especially internationally. Well, you've heard the story about Savannah Guthrie's mother disappearing. Well, a man's been arrested for sending what amounted to a ransom note wanting bitcoins for the return of her mother. Turned out that was a hoax. The man was tracked down and arrested. Minnesota Green Energy Program, funded by Obama, has been fined for killing a bald eagle. National treasure. University of Minnesota facing a proposed penalty of over $14,000 after it was discovered that a green energy initiative funded by a grant from the Obama administration was responsible for the gruesome death of an American bald eagle. Incident occurred at the University of Minnesota's oldest wind energy research field station in Dakota County, Minnesota. Photos obtained by Fox News show the moment the University of Minnesota wind turbine struck the bald eagle, dismembering it into 3 pieces, leaving a bloodied carcass on the floor below. In a violation notice says the university violated the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act by killing the eagles without what's called an incidental take permit. As such, university is facing a proposed civil penalty of $14,536 for illegally killing what one Department of the Interior official called a national treasure. We'll see what they have to say about that, if there's any money left to do it. Well, Nancy Guthrie, that's Savannah Guthrie's mother, her son has posted a new video as the first ransom deadline has passed. The search has been going now for 6 days. An investigation into her disappearance enters day 6 as the FBI is offering a $50,000 reward for information that gives anybody any idea what happened to her. She was reported missing February 1st from her home in Tucson. And the son of missing Arizona grandmother Nancy Guthrie sent a message to her alleged captors Thursday, pleading with them to make contact with the family. In video posted to her sister and NBC Today co-host Savannah Guthrie's Instagram, Cameron Guthrie led a statement in front of the camera. The sheriff says calls of condolences taking up non-emergency phone lines that are needed for the investigation. Well, Prince William's zero tolerance has been tested as Sarah Ferguson emails reveal crude comment to Epstein. Prince William's reported a zero tolerance for royal ties to Epstein is being tested once again after newly released emails involving Sarah Ferguson prompted experts to say the Duchess is now unfit for any royal proximity. An email where Ferguson made a crude comment about her then 19-year-old daughter surfaced in the latest batch of documents released by the Department of Justice. DOJ recently released more than 3 million Epstein records, including his personal emails. Inclusion in the files doesn't necessarily imply wrongdoing, but it certainly does raise eyebrows. One email revealed, dated March of 2010, Epstein asked Ferguson about a trip to New York. Ferguson responded, "Not sure yet, just waiting for Eugene to come back for a shagging weekend." Well, some folks just call them like they see them. Kamala Harris was mocked after relaunch of a campaign account as Generation Z-led progressive content hub. Former VP Kamala Harris received widespread mockery online Thursday after relaunching her campaign account as a Generation Z-led progressive content hub. In the months after her defeat in the 2024 presidential election, there's been a great deal of debate over what her future political aspirations might be. Her decision not to run for California governor was seen as a sign she plans to run for the 2028 election cycle. She still wants to be president. That account, now dubbed HQ and at headquarters _67, a possible reference to the 67 meme, shared a video with the caption, "Welcome to headquarters, the new Gen Z-led progressive content hub." Fox News Digital reached out to her office to ask whether this was her intent and hadn't got an immediate answer back. They would have called for a voicemail, but all she would have done was giggle. Well, Palantir's Shyam Sankar says what executives and leaders using AI should do. He's the Chief Technology Officer and Executive VP of Palantir Technologies. Told Fox News Digital artificial intelligence will be a massively meritocratic force within the workplace and offered advice to corporate leaders on how to best position their companies and employees for success. Yeah, something new, and he's already an expert. Golly gee whiz. Women's sports activists react after boxer Amain Khalif makes a confession about biological sex. Boxer Amain Khalif admitted to having the SRY gene located in the Y chromosome, which is found in the biological males, and undergoing hormone treatments to lower testosterone levels ahead of the 2024 Olympics. In an interview with the French sports publication L'Equipe, according to what Khalif said, "We all have different genetics, different hormone levels. I'm not transgender. My difference is natural. This is who I am. I haven't done anything to change the way nature made me. I've taken hormone treatments to lower my testosterone levels for competitions." Well, hopefully whoever she's going to eventually marry is going to be made aware of all this. Well, according to J. Michael Waller, he infiltrated radical groups 40 years ago. He said leftists are desperate for martyrs, and they're certainly getting some of them these days. It appears agitators are trying to spark confrontations with federal law enforcement that could lead to protesters being harmed, even killed, to spark outrage and support for their cause. It's a sick story. It sounds outrageous, but it is true. And everything old is new again. According to this undercover agent, saw it 40 years ago and testified it to Congress. Today we're seeing it again, inserting American citizens into flashpoints as part of a political strategy to get people shot for the purpose of inflaming the public against the president and his policies. The recent deaths of 2 Minnesota protesters reminded him of what he'd learned as a 24-year-old in the mid-1980s while infiltrating radical groups, which is people in their 20s are doing today. Revolutionaries and insurgents create or exploit flashpoints in anticipation of getting some of their followers killed. It's been reported in Minneapolis, the revolutionaries and insurgents need martyrs to spark or fuel public anger. Facing professionally organized provocations and stressors, it was inevitable that immigration and customs enforcement and border patrol agents would plunge into circumstances that domestic extremists had created to provoke media outrage. And that's how revolutions get started, folks. Well, an iconic pizza chain, Pizza Hut, is going to close about 250 locations around the country. It's going to affect underperforming restaurants. There are some parts of the country just do not care for pizza. Other parts they can't get enough. It's going to close locations in the U.S. through June as its parent company, Yum Brands, moves to shut underperforming stores and reassess the brand's long-term strategy. Well, Iran has seized oil tankers and threatens a massacre in the Strait of Hormuz hours before talks start with the U.S. Iran seized 2 foreign oil tankers in the Persian Gulf yesterday, accusing them of smuggling fuel and detaining 15 foreign crew members ahead of high-stakes U.S.-Iran talks start today in Oman. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says it intercepted 2 ships near Farsi Island, claiming they were carrying about 1 million liters of smuggled fuel. That's according to a report from Reuters. The crews, made up of 15 foreign nationals, were taken into custody and referred to Iran's judiciary authorities. That's according to the Iranian state media. Well, Carolyn Levitt says President Trump prefers not to watch Bad Bunny at the Super Bowl halftime show. There's a lot of other folks who don't particularly care for Bad Bunny. White House Press Secretary Karen Leavitt revealed which Super Bowl halftime show President Trump prefers to watch this Sunday. Grammy Award winner Bad Bunny be performing during the official Super Bowl halftime show in Santa Clara, California for Sunday's games. But concern among conservatives over Bad Bunny's apparent woke values inspired Turning Point USA to plan its own All-American halftime for Sunday, headlined by country rock artist Kid Rock, who apparently President Trump is a fan of. Okay. U.S. ski star Lindsey Vonn is stunned in Olympic training 1 week after she had an ACL tear. Olympic gold medalist and American ski star Lindsey Vonn continued to defy the odds on today when she completed her first training session in the women's alpine skiing downhill just a week after she completely tore her ACL in the World Cup race. Wearing the number 10 bib and a knee brace on her left knee, she successfully completed her run on a day when fog delayed skiers waiting for their turn at the Tofane Alpine Skiing Center in Cortina d'Ampezzo, Italy. 41-year-old champion skier make her return to the Winter Olympics in the women's downhill on Sunday. Well, Washington Post has joined other news outlets in laying off race-based journalists. Among the high-profile layoffs, the Washington Post this week was its race-based journalist, Emmanuel Felton, whose ex-profile now describes himself as the first and last race and ethnicity reporter at the Post, revealed he was among the hundreds of staffers who were cut from the Democracy Dies in Darkness paper, though he claims his specific ouster wasn't a financial decision. It's race-based, of course, don't you know? Well, the new White House website, TrumpRx.gov, offering Americans discounted prescription drug prices, says it's a historic action. Trump slashed cost of medications through deals with 16 major pharmaceutical companies. President Trump unveiled TrumpRx.gov, a new government-backed website aimed at giving Americans access to discounted prescription drugs. We'll see if it is successful. Well, according to Laura Ingraham, health policy experts have missed a giant blind spot. All these actions that were supposed to make health cheaper have, for the most part, failed. Well, I mentioned earlier about the man that was arrested for sending texts to the Guthrie family asking for bitcoins during the missing mother case. Federal prosecutors have charged a California man with sending a fake ransom note in an effort to extort Savannah Guthrie and her siblings, as her 84-year-old mother still remains missing. What local authorities say looks like a forced abduction from her home in Tucson. Derek Kalila is accused of demanding a ransom across state lines and using anonymous telecommunications to abuse, threaten, or harass the Guthrie family. One is always an opportunist. He's looking to make money off somebody else's issues. Well, progressives backed by Bernie Sanders and the AOC on the verge of an upset in the Democratic congressional primary. Far-left candidate backed by progressive champion Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, Representative Alexia Ocasio-Cortez, who thinks she should be queen, Democrat of New York, is close to pulling off an upset victory with votes still being counted in the Democratic congressional primary for a blue-leaning seat in New Jersey. And Lila Meha, a progressive organizer, has a slight lead. 486 votes out of more than 61,000 have been counted. Over former Democratic Representative Tom Malinowski. You can hear the peanut gallery tuning up. Well, those two candidates are the leaders among a field of 11 Democratic candidates in the race to fill the seat left vacant by now Governor Mickey Sorrell. She stepped down after winning November's gubernatorial election in the Garden State. According to what Meha said, we have to rebuild our party, rebuild what's happening in our nation. We have to reclaim our democracy. We know our economy is rigged to suit the billionaires. That's the same old tired rhetoric that you hear them come out with every time they run for something. If you have money, you're evil. Even though all three of the folks that are beating the drum have become millionaires while serving in Congress. Well, Fox Nation revealed the scandals and secrets of America's first presidents in a film called The White House. It's an original docudrama series. It takes viewers behind the betrayals and scandals and power struggles that shaped America's earliest presidents and their families. It's an 8-part series. Spans from John Adams' presidency through James Madison's tenure, ending with the deadly War of 1812 and the burning of the White House. Premiering February 6th. That's today, folks. With a 2-episode debut, the series dramatizes real events from the White House's formative years, beginning with President John Adams. Well, to the dismay of Democrats across the country, Melania's hit documentary is a smashing success. And a lot of these critics desperately wanted her to fail. The film Melania The documentary about First Lady Melania Trump made nearly $8 million on its opening weekend, making it the highest grossing documentary in a decade. It's a huge win for the First Lady and a crushing defeat for those rooting against her. The director, Melania, Brett Ratner, has previously helmed Hollywood blockbusters such as Rush Hour and X-Men: The Last Stand. The fact that he was already an established brand in Hollywood is noteworthy. During the first Trump term, it would have been unlikely a Hollywood director would take a chance on a documentary about Melania Trump. Melania still took a risk making the film because Hollywood is traditionally in lockstep on politics and quick to cut off anybody who steps outside that line. Easier to make a film like this in 2026 than it was in 2017, but only marginally so. So no matter how hard the Democrats have worked to cut her down, she's come out on top. Well, according to Senator John Kennedy, Democrats' defund the police plan has failed, but they're still trying. As from what he had to say, as he's watched the protest in Minneapolis, it seems obvious to him America's at risk of falling face first in another disaster down our law enforcement crisis. There's some people in the world who enjoy hurting other people and taking other people's stuff. Those people aren't sick, they're not confused, they're not mixed up. It's not their mothers or fathers didn't love them enough. They're just antisocial. He didn't know why God made some people that way. If he gets to heaven, he's going to ask. Well, let's see what else we got. Well, there are 14 tech upgrades you can use to level up your Super Bowl Sunday. One of them starts at just $7. I'm talking about TVs, some of them as much as 65 inches. Fire TV especially. A lot of smart TVs are on sale right now. And you still got time to rush out and get one before the game starts. Well, the RNC has rolled out a powerful new TikTok strategy to win over key demographics after President Trump's 2024 success. Republican National Committee is upping its social media presence following President Trump's lead by officially launching a TikTok account, making a strategic shift for the party as it continues to look to connect to younger voters. RNC's plan to make an impact on digital front lines involves the official launch of @Republicans on TikTok, which is designed to engage a critical demographic. Those are the voters under 30 who may not follow traditional political news, but rely heavily on social media for their information. And that move comes at the same time polling from Pew Research shows that 63% of Americans aged 18 to 29 use TikTok. Platforms have become an essential battleground for reaching the next generation of voters. President Trump has credited TikTok with being a key part of his election victory in 2024. Well, a haunting ancient battle trumpet has been unearthed in landscape tied to a legendary queen. Archaeologists recently unearthed a stunning relic from the early days of ancient Britain, a Celtic battle trumpet tied to the tribe of the legendary Queen Boadicea. January, Historic England announced a variety of Iron Age objects were found during a routine archaeological excavation. And the star of the cache was a near-complete Iron Age battle trumpet used to blare eerie sounds in battle and rally troops against the enemy. We need something like that today. All right. Well, we've been talking about a lot of unusual stories. And certainly we have been talking about a lot of strange stories to do with California, especially Mount Shasta. When I lived there, I heard all kinds of strange stories about that area. Well, one thing you have to ask yourself these days, is anything what it really seems to be? Can we even trust what's right in front of us? And there's so many things that can actually be called into question. There's one story that I came across that I found absolutely fascinating. It was about Mother Teresa. Now, of course, she's the one that said you don't need to go to the doctor. God heals. But as soon as she got sick, she went to the doctor. But there was another interesting story about Mother Teresa. Now, of course, she is best known for efforts to aid the poor on the Indian subcontinent. And she was much applauded for her apparently selfless sacrifice. And after her death, she was even canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church. But what's much less known and much less understood about Mother Teresa is the conspiracy theory regarding the possibility there was an ulterior motive behind her efforts. For a number of years, there have been claims that she used the poor and suffering to garner media attention for herself. There have been claims she took money that's supposed to go to the poverty-stricken and used it to live a lavish life. Now, you may have thought she was living in a hovel, but according to conspiracy theorists, that's what she wanted you to see as she was posing for her publicity shots in front of the press. In reality, she was living in a mansion in Calcutta. Just like when you look for patterns in random clouds, you can usually find a conspiracy just about anything. But even Mother Teresa's ascension to sainthood doesn't make her immune to such speculation. And then there are those who sincerely believe she was not only not working out of the kindness of her heart, she was actually working for the American CIA. Now, how and why would Mother Teresa sign on with the CIA? When I heard that theory, I had to scratch my head on that one. According to this conspiracy theory, she was initially planted in India by the CIA under the front of delivering herself, giving aid to the poor, but she was actually reporting back to the U.S. about communist activity on the Indian subcontinent. It's also been alleged that Mother Teresa was actually working for the interest of big business corporations. Now, there's a British investigative journalist named Christopher Hitchens once tried to insinuate this by pointing out an incident in 1984. It was the Indian town of Bhopal when it was devastated by the horrendous after effects of an explosion at a local chemical plant. Mother Teresa actually offered a rather tepid response. According to Hutchins, when local residents, some of them who wished to take legal action against the negligence they had been subjected to, flocked to the council of Mother Teresa and asked her what they should do, she said, just forgive those responsible. Well, this struck people like Hutchins as kind of suspect. Was Mother Teresa actually supporting the corporations responsible? Was she perhaps in cahoots with them? Of course, most would assume that this saintly woman was simply living up to one of the most important tenets of the Christian faith, forgiving others. But conspiracy theorists saw a lot more in that. They believe this quick call to forgive showed that Mother Teresa was in league with Indian big business and was working as her own personal spin doctor for damage control. These efforts are allegedly extended well beyond India as well. This was said to be demonstrating Mother Teresa made a highly publicized trip to Haiti in 1981 to support the regime of Jean-Claude Duvalier. Now, Jean-Claude, never quite able to solidify his own regime, is best known simply for being the son of Haiti's infamous former dictator, Francois Papadoc Duvalier. For this reason, most people refer to the progeny of Francois as Baby Doc, title that Jean-Claude apparently detested. When Baby Doc's hold on the Haitian government grew particularly rocky and tenuous, it was none other than Mother Teresa, a woman who reportedly asserted she was above politics, who came to Haiti seemingly on a mission to prop up the alien dictator. So did the CIA, fearing a communist takeover and the vacuum be left by the end of the Duvalier dictatorship, send Mother Teresa to stabilize the status quo? Well, those who subscribe to this particular conspiracy theory believe this is precisely the case. Mother Teresa purposefully made a big show of support for the Duvalier family and even famously embraced Baby Doc's wife, Michelle Duvalier, as the camera bulbs of the international media flashed. She then proudly proclaimed her support for the dictatorship to the waiting press, stating that she'd never seen the poor people being so familiar with her head of state as they were with her. Well, no matter how familiar the poor and struggling masses were, Theresa's fellow Catholics who suffered terribly at the bottom rung of Haitian society certainly were not benefiting from the Duvalier leadership. You have to remember the Duvalier family very much believed in voodoo. There was a growing unrest at this point, even open talk of rebellion and revolution. So was the heavy influence of Mother Teresa in the Catholic world used and exploited as a tool by the CIA to quell the discontent of Catholic Haitians and prevent a communist takeover? Well, a lot of otherwise rational people believe that. They also believe a trip that Mother Teresa made to Nicaragua during the height of the Iran-Contra scandal was, of course, another junket at the behest of the CIA. Wanted to use any and all tools at their disposal, the Central Intelligence Agency sought to utilize Mother Teresa's massive influence to turn back the clock on the Sandinista revolutionists who were threatening to take over the country. According to conspiracy theorists who support the idea that Mother Teresa was working for the CIA, there are certain details that serve as clues to her more clandestine past. They actually contend that her efforts in much of the Third World, whether it was India, Haiti, or Nicaragua, leave a complete blueprint and trail of intent that makes such initially far-fetched seeming assertions certainly seem very plausible indeed. And these assertions have been made by notable figures as recently as 2015. Indian Member of Parliament Glocke Yogi is a Hindu nationalist who's leveled charges against Mother Teresa that range from conspiracy to forced conversion. In fact, he even managed to put it all together in one convenient sentence when he charged that Mother Teresa was part of a conspiracy to Christianize India. Well, he issued this condemnation while attending a Hindu religious event known as Ram Katha. India's Catholic Archbishop was quick to defend Mother Teresa, however. He pointed out that all her good works while she was alive and claimed that she was always open and transparent in everything she did. But the detractors still remain. Some have even recently pointed the finger at the man who first brought Mother Teresa to the world stage. Former ABC journalist Malcolm Muggeridge, in his tour de force documentary, Something Beautiful for God, he presented Mother Teresa as a portrait of kindness and self-sacrifice. Later on, he even made the claim that as the film crew began to adjust the lighting, they observed Mother Teresa with a halo floating above her head. Such a glowing terms and alleged glowing effects that Malcolm Muggeridge introduced Mother Teresa to a larger audience and made her a household name. Some claim this simply shows that Muggeridge himself was working for the CIA as well. It was all a clandestine program to propel the old nun into places she should not normally be. And more than anything, it's Mother Teresa's unlikely rise to prominence has led to conspiracy theories in the first place. People have wondered aloud how could one poor old nun accomplish so much? And apparently some others have answered this question by deciding to see conspiracy. For them, the dutiful Mother Teresa actually had help, and maybe that help was none other than the CIA. Well, there's been a lot of speculation and theories in regard to what exactly crashed into the Welsh mountains of Berwyn in 1974. It's often been referred to by true believers as the Welsh Roswell, due to its similarities to the supposed 1947 UFO crash in the U.S. But the event that happened in Berwyn is in many ways much more puzzling than the Roswell crash ever was. The official explanation is mundane. The object seen plummeting from the Welsh skies, nothing more than a falling meteor. But in the years since the incident, several eyewitnesses the original event had come forward, and they had different stories to tell. For one thing, they say there's no way a meteor could crash into a mountain and cough up strangely inhuman occupants. January 23rd, 1974. It was otherwise a quiet Wednesday evening. Several residents of Wales bore witness to strange illuminating objects moving rapidly across the sky. This went on for several minutes, then followed by the sound of a massive explosion on one of the mountains that could be heard for several miles around. The police and other first responders immediately mobilized, but they were curiously unprepared to traverse the mountains and had to borrow equipment from one of the locals instead. They ended up knocking on the door of Hugh Lloyd, a resident of the nearby village of Landrillo, and Lloyd took him up the mountainside in his tractor. According to Lloyd, from their vantage point, they could see an extremely bright light on the other side, but after a few moments it simply winked out. Remains unclear if the police were unprepared for the rough terrain, if they just got spooked. They soon called off their search due to poor visibility in the darkness. They wouldn't resume the investigation until the next day. Meanwhile, another area resident, a nurse named Pat Evans, headed toward the site of the explosion, believing, just as the police had, that the plane had crashed. She figured her medical expertise might be needed to treat the victims of the supposed crash, and she did have experience in such emergencies. She was truly worried about whoever or whatever might have crashed into the Berwyn mountain range. According to her, she was able to drive to just a few feet away from the object. When she did, she realized it wasn't an airplane crash at all. In fact, it wasn't even an airplane. With her car stopped on the mountain path and her headlights illuminating the object through the darkness, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was large, about the size of a large car, she said, perfectly round, faintly glowing, ball-shaped object sitting right on top of the mountain. Very soon after this revelation, she had an even more stunning one. She noticed, lying right there on the ground a few feet from her car, the dead body of one of the occupants. With it came the instant realization that whatever flew that mysterious craft was not human. Shocked and on a frightened kind of autopilot, she immediately turned her car around and proceeded to go back down the mountain. It was like she was fleeing back down the mountain path that she saw the approaching lights of another vehicle and was accosted by a carload of soldiers who ordered her off the mountain. Well, in the aftermath, skeptics would come up with many theories to explain some of the odd happenings on Berwyn Mountain. But the contingent of soldiers that Pat Evans ran into and just what they were doing on the mountain remains a sticking point that couldn't be readily explained. That is until sometime in the 1990s when one of those mysterious soldiers from that convoy came forward to talk to UFO researcher Tim Dodd about what really happened that night. This unnamed informant allegedly told Dodd he was part of the contingent that Pat had encountered, and he and his group had been ordered to stand by just before the crash. They were then ordered to retrieve a couple of large boxes and deliver them to Porton Down at nearby Salisbury, Wiltshire. Now, Porton Down is a top-secret military research institution, and according to this informant, that was the final resting place of the occupants of that downed craft. He said when they arrived at Porton Down, a superior officer ceremoniously opened the ET coffin they carried right in front of them to reveal a bizarre creature covered in containment suits, apparently put on by the humans who recovered them. And from looking at them, the men deduced two things. The pilots of the craft were dead, duh, and they were not of this world. His alleged witness also told Dodd that later that night he encountered another group of soldiers who claimed to have been given custody over actual living entities from the crashed craft. And that story would then emerge that the Royal Navy had been conducting military exercises at the time. It's alleged that these exercises entailed several Navy vessels dropping flash bombs into the water. The Navy was apparently looking for something. Upon illumination of the deep, were able to flesh out 3 submerged UFOs. One of these craft had supposedly crashed into the mountain. So did the Royal Navy craft a strategy to ambush aliens and take them captive? Well, that's what the people who believe that in this particular conspiracy theory think absolutely is the case. Shortly after this supposed whistleblower from the British military came forward, an odd aspect of his story came to light. He'd gone under the pseudonym of James Prescott. Only thing is, after just a little bit of research, it was discovered his supposed pseudonym was already taken by a staff sergeant of the Royal Engineers who died in the Falklands War of 1982. Well, this sparked a mini conspiracy theory of its own, suggesting that Staff Sergeant Prescott had survived the Falkland War and gone undercover. Of course, there could be simpler explanations. Maybe the informant was attempting to point the public's attention toward those who'd served in the conflict by using the name of the deceased staff sergeant. So just what did the crash in the Berwyn Mountains entail? And what in the world could it possibly have to do with the Falkland Islands? Amazingly, according to conspiracy theories, quite a lot. If you do a bit of digging on this subject, there's actually quite a lot of speculation. This was a bizarre ulterior motive for the British invasion of the islands. They were trying to obtain an escaped alien life form. This entity supposedly has the consistency of black goo, and it's completely sentient, lurking in the waters off the Falklands. This is what the British were supposedly ready to spend blood and treasure for so they could bottle it up and take it back to the labs in the UK. Now, it sounds ridiculous to most folks, but that is a legitimate conspiracy theory that made the rounds. Just Google Black Goo Conspiracy on the internet, and you'll get several hits, and a lot of the tales claim a direct link back to the Barrow in the Mountains incident. Now, the Barrow in the Mountain incident's a conspiracy theory still very much in the making. Stay tuned for further developments, of course. Well, one of the things that I touched on in a new book that came out, talking about the Nazi space program, is something called the Glocke. In the U.S. and much of the rest of the world, the UFO phenomena as we know it didn't really get started till a few years after World War II, and been kicked off with the infamous Roswell incident in 1947. But since then, some conspiracy theorists have laid out the claim that these strange craft made their first appearance a decade before that. This time, the little gray men didn't crash in the deserts of Mexico, but in the trees of Germany's Black Forest. According to these conspiracy theories, the UFOs in general and the device known as the Glocke in particular, both have their origin in this singular event. It was here the Nazis supposedly recovered an alien craft and reverse engineered it. Accounts vary as to what happened to the occupants. According to some versions of the story, all the alien pilots of the craft are already dead when the Germans arrived, but another, much more sinister variation of that tale insists that some of the ETs were alive, and they made a deal with the Nazis that arrived on the scene. Now, what this deal may have pertained to isn't really clear. There's a lot of wild and, of course, unverified accounts made it down the pipeline as to just what kind of collateral the Germans may have handed over to the aliens in exchange for advanced technology. Some have even gone so far as to claim the Holocaust itself was part of a deal the Germans struck with the malevolent aliens. Now, I tend to doubt that. I think that was just the Nazi wackiness. It is, to say the least, a highly controversial assertion to make regarding such a painful thing as a Holocaust. Those who have created such conspiratorial tales revolving around something so serious and still painfully raw as the Holocaust run the risk of being accused of being Holocaust deniers. Denying the horrors of all too ordinary men unleashed by ascribing blame to aliens from outer space strikes a lot of folks as just beyond the pale. But there are those that have done that. But at any rate, according to the most general of the conspiracy theories revolving around the Black Forest crash, a bargain was made in which the ETs agreed to help the Germans advance their technology. Supposedly this extra help that allowed the Germans to create the Earth's first rockets, the V-1 and the V-2. First jet aircraft, the Messerschmitt 262, and even prototypes for flying saucers. A lot of diagrams of such craft were recovered after the war. And then, of course, there was the Bell, or as the Germans called it, the Glocke. Nazi Glocke allegedly became one of Hitler's top secret and highly prized wonder weapons after being reverse engineered from alien technology in an isolated research lab in a region of Poland known as the Wenceslaus mine. The object itself is said to have stood about 15 feet tall and about 8 feet around. Besides its size and shape, the other thing that stood out about this object was its structural integrity. Composed of an extremely durable heavy metal, this durability is apparently needed since the device routinely generated extreme amounts of energy. Energy came from two counter-rotating cylinders on the bottom of the craft that worked to create a gravitational field of propulsion. And these cylinders are fueled by a purplish fluid said to have the consistency of mercury that was fed into the craft. German scientists call this magical serum Exrum 525. Whatever it was highly toxic. When not in use, it was stored in giant lead-lined thermos containers in order to mitigate its lethal effects. Also claimed that once the liquid was added and the Glocke was activated, a radius for as much as a quarter of a mile became potentially hazardous due to strange side effects of the device's powerful gravitational field. It said this field could cause blood to congeal within veins, causing lethal blood clots and killing those afflicted right on the spot. Several of the scientists commissioned to work on the project are said to have died in this fashion while testing it out. In the very grass underneath the Bell met a horrific fate, being transformed into a greasy semi-liquid congealed material, disturbingly splayed across the ground. The only thing that remains of the Glocke today is a steel ring that's said to have been centered around the device as a staging area. Skeptics have claimed that this steel ring, strangely reminiscent of England's Stonehenge in shape was nothing more than a place for a cooling tower to be inserted. But for those who believed the Nazi UFO theory, this ominous structure meant a whole lot more. For them, it's a mechanism that aided with the manipulation of the very fabric of time and space. This framework served as a conduit to channel Die Glocke's incredible power. Anchored in place, scientists observed from protected underground rooms while the device rose overhead. This was a necessity to keep the specialized technicians monitoring the experience from perishing in the process. Sadly enough, it said the concentration camp inmates were used as expendable fodder in order to conduct the routine maintenance necessary to keep the device functioning. Some were even used as guinea pigs placed in the vicinity of the object during launch simply to observe the lethal psychological effects. When the device wasn't in use, it was stored in a room immediately underneath a steel frame circle on the surface. Underground storage room was walled off by thermal tiles, somewhat similar to the tiles that coat NASA's now defunct space shuttles to protect them during re-entry. These tiles were designed to absorb immense heat and energy, but they often seemed barely up to the task when it came to containing the awesome power of Die Glocke. Once the device was activated, it would rise up out of its underground chamber and float above the steel ring in the staging area as it whirled and buzzed and rotated. But if this device that harnessed the power of gravity did exist, what was it used for? It's in regard to this actual use of this odd device that the waters of conspiracy theory really get even murkier. One claim states the device had a concave mirror on top of it that allowed holograms from the past to be generated. But as nifty as that might sound, why would the Nazis, who were hard-pressed just to fend off Allied advances at this point in the war, expend such extraordinary amounts of energy just to see a few images from the past? Well, some theorists believe that these projections from previous time periods were just a preliminary act. The bell's real purpose was to open up a hole in the fabric of time and space itself. Essentially, it was a time machine. Even more incredibly, as World War II was drawing to a close, it's asserted leading members of the Nazi Party escaped the wrath of their enemies by using Die Glocke to make a one-way trip to the future. The last known record of Die Glocke being in Germany came from about December of 1945. Seems to have simply vanished without a trace. Coincidentally enough, December 6, 1965, 20 years later, a strange acorn or bell-shaped object inexplicably appeared in the American skies and crashed in a forest in Pennsylvania. It's been witnessed traveling over several states at a high rate of speed. Then it made what seemed to be a controlled descent over Pennsylvania, dripping molten debris before crashing into the trees near Kecksburg. The residents who witnessed this craft claimed it was shaped like an acorn or a bell, with odd markings on the bottom of it. Upon comparative analysis, the German Glocke seemed to have had the same odd markings. Probably stems from the fact that German scientists behind the object had deep connections to pagan Germanic folklore, which frequently deployed arcane symbols. Swastika itself is one of those occult symbols, and as we all know, the Nazis plastered it on just about everything they came in contact with. As the residents stared and wondered at this strange object, a group of military specialists descended on the scene and demanded to leave the area at once. The forest was then cordoned off, and no further civilians were allowed access to the site. Later that evening, residents did manage to see the military escort a large flatbed truck out of the woods, transporting a turquoise object reportedly of the same dimensions as the bell. It's believed that the craft was then transported to Dayton, Ohio, what was dropped off at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Many years later, a delivery truck driver by the name of Myron would supply another piece of the puzzle. Shortly after this, Myron says he was ordered to deliver an astounding 6,500 tons of ceramic brick to Wright-Patterson. He claims to have seen Die Glocke in storage at the facility while delivering his payload. The ceramic bricks were apparently needed to create a protective casing around the object in order to shield Wright-Patterson from extreme heat and power surges. This is the Nazi secret prototype of 1945. Had to be shielded by ceramic tiles at all times. So did the pinnacle of German or maybe alien technology really disappear from the collapsing Nazi regime in 1945 only to reappear in 1965, as conspiracy theorists believe? Interestingly enough, the bell itself wasn't the only thing to have disappeared from Germany after the war. The man in charge of the entire Die Glocke project, Heinz Kammler, vanished as well. Some say he used the time-warping powers of the Nazi bell right at the end of the war in order to transport himself out of harm's way by traveling 20 years into the future to Kecksburg, Pennsylvania in 1965. So did this Nazi accused of using slave labor from concentration camps to construct a top-secret craft to escape justice by traveling 2 decades into the future? Well, only conspiracy theorists claim to know the truth. But if he did, wonder if he'd have to face charges. Well, the next interesting story that we're going to talk about is a very well-known project known as MKUltra. A lot of folks think the top U.S. priority in the 60s was the space race with the Soviet Union. In fact, it was a competition of another kind being conducted during America's Cold War. Competition of the mind, or more accurately, who could best control the mind. The U.S. first became concerned with that its adversaries were developing advanced mind control techniques shortly after World War II. In the aftermath of the war, after the Iron Curtain of communism descended across Europe, it was noted that several dissidents and prisoners of war in communist-held countries were making false confessions. They were somehow being made to publicly confess to things that were not only false, but so outlandish they were impossible to have accomplished. It's a frequent occurrence to have subjects confessing to things they couldn't possibly have done. These individuals seem to be in some kind of altered state as they readily put forth their patently absurd confessions. At first, U.S. intelligence assumed that they must have been confessing out of fear for their lives, but as Moscow show trials rolled on, and several of these unfortunates ended their statements by literally begging the courts to show them no mercy and to immediately execute them, the alarmed intelligence community in Washington realized that something strange was afoot. They believed that something else was a concerted effort at mind control. That theory only intensified at the onset of the Korean War, when U.S. troops were captured by Soviet-backed forces on the Korean Peninsula and subjected to covert mind control programs. These men were allegedly marched through the Chinese province of Manchuria and subjected to, in literal translation, the Mandarin the Chinese term, brainwashing, technique to wash or wipe away the captured Americans' memories and personal identities. A lot of instances, it seemed to have succeeded. Many of the POWs who were taken to Manchuria inexplicably lost all recall of what went on during their internment. They seem to have been victims of manually induced amnesia. In the wake of these findings, the U.S. government began to fear the prospect of a real-life Manchurian candidate. Believed that former POWs may have been selectively programmed by the communists to be triggered into spying and other covert acts during the U.S. Against the U.S. by hypnotic command. And worst of all, it was believed that these men could all be ticking time bombs programmed by the enemy to kill upon suggestion. In this cloud of deep Cold War suspicion and fear that these potentially psychologically manipulated soldiers came home from the Korean War, that the CIA began to ramp up its own mind control studies. April 13, 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles initiated the program become known as MKUltra. CIA allegedly wanted to counter and even surpass the techniques that their Cold War adversaries had developed, even looking into the creation of a mind-controlled truth serum they could use on captured communists in the field. But in order to gain this ability, they had to experiment on those closest to them, which consisted of their own citizens. After the CIA greenlighted MKUltra, those in charge of the program began to seek out test subjects in the deepest and darkest of places. They partnered with a man named George White to control whole apartment complexes in New York and San Francisco. They used prostitutes to have unsuspecting test subjects lured to the premises. And once there, the prostitute would give her ostensible John a drink laced with a heavy dose of LSD, while a group of rather unscrupulous CIA agents watched the results of the encounter. This was perfect cover for the CIA early on. They could meticulously record the strange results of their experiments, and rest assured the men, too ashamed to admit their illicit meetings with prostitutes, would never come forward. And furthermore, even if they did, nobody would take them seriously in the first place. Who'd believe a man claiming to have been drugged by a prostitute working for the CIA? Well, this whole situation sounds way too much like tabloid news, like a conspiracy theory. In fact, it's a documented reality. In the case of MKUltra, future document dumps under the Freedom of Information Act would confirm that our CIA really did engage in these nefarious dealings. And then the CIA took its initial findings from the seedy underworld and moved on to established institutions. They began to funnel money into universities and mental hospitals who were willing to provide research support for their mind control projects. And soon enough, patients and other test subjects had been given huge doses of LSD to see what it would do to them. CIA's best friend in these efforts was a distinguished psychiatrist named Dr. Ewan Cameron. By the time MKUltra, Dr. Cameron was the president of the American Psychiatric Association. The CIA wanted to conduct business with somebody who had his fingers on the pulse of millions of vulnerable minds. Dr. Cameron was certainly their man. He knew nobody else. He knew, like nobody else, just how their schemes could be implemented. In his insidious experiments, he would put his patients into an induced coma with heavy medication for several days, and he routinely administer electroshock therapy. In between the shock treatments, the doctor would blare from a speaker positioned directly by the patient's ear, either static noise or pre-recorded hypnotic suggestions. The doctor claimed he was developing a technique he called depatterning, in which he could decouple a patient from their mental illness. But by the end of the supposed treatment, all he had managed to do was traumatize the patients to the extent they suffered from amnesia so bad they lost both their memory and all sense of who they were. Apparently it was what the CIA wanted. Part of the objective was to allegedly learn how to do just such a memory wipe. They supposedly wanted to learn how to wash the human brain completely clean, just as the Chinese had done in Manchuria. They not only wanted to perfect the technique of inducing amnesia, they also wanted to be able to insert program memories, even hold identities into the blank slates they had turned their test subjects into. One of these test subjects was a woman named Linda McDonald. 1963. Ms. McDonald was just 25 years old, suffering from a debilitating case of postpartum depression. So at the advice of her personal physician, was directed to the special clinic that Dr. Cameron was running in Montreal, Canada. She and her family initially thought it was going to be just a brief stay, but that stay would turn into months. Also became the most harrowing experience in her life. But here's the thing, she wouldn't even remember most of her experience at the hands of Dr. Cameron and his staff because her entire memory was effectively wiped. Only by reading her declassified file that folks figured out what actually happened to her. According to the record, she was interned at the research facility for only 86 days in a sleep room. She was given massive doses of drugs and constant shock therapy. And it was this sleep room that managed to wipe out her memory for good, leaving her mind as blank as an infant's. When she was brought out in a wheelchair and released back to her family, she couldn't speak, couldn't even use the bathroom without assistance. Had to relearn every aspect of human life all over again. And when she relearned how to communicate, it was discovered she had no memory of her family at all. Well, on that note, we've come to the end of today's show. We'll be back Monday, because today is Friday. And then we'll be talking about more conspiracy theories and strange things. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great weekend. And don't forget, this is the 13th season of the Ken Hudnall Show. We've done over 1,300 episodes about some of the strangest topics you'd ever want to see. So check them out. And Monday, we should have our new website up where you can access, with the click of a button, all these strange shows. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great weekend.